Origins of an Ordinary Man. Before the world trembled at his name, he was just another dreamer wandering the cold streets of Vienna, a boy with sketches and dream of art school and imagine his name among the world's great painters. When Alois died in 1903, the family's stability collapsed. His mother, Clara, became his emotional anchor, the one person he adored. But tragedy struck again in 1907 when Clara succumbed to breast cancer. Her death shattered him. Years later, his doctor recalled Hitler weeping uncontrollably at her bedside. That same year, Hitler applied to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, his dream, and was rejected. Twice. The admissions board said his drawings lacked human figures, suggesting he was better suited for architecture. But Hitler took it as humiliation. By 1909, he was penniless. His inheritance was gone, his friendships few, his prospects none. He drifted through Vienna's slums, selling cheap art on street corners and sleeping in shelters. He read obsessively, books on history, politics, and the rise and fall of empires. In the libraries of Vienna, among the dust and silence, the seeds of ideology began to form. The city around him was a melting pot of nationalities. Germans, Jews, Czechs, Hungarians, all living under the decaying Austro-Hungarian Empire. Nationalism and prejudice simmered in the streets. Politicians spewed populist rhetoric, and newspapers printed conspiracies daily. Hitler absorbed it all. He began to believe that greatness wasn't given, it had to be seized. That failure was not his fault, but the world's fault. In 1913, still struggling to survive, he left Vienna for Munich, hoping for a fresh start. He was stateless, broke, and adrift. But fate had other plans. A year later, World War I erupted. Millions would die, and one failed artist would find purpose in the chaos. As the call for volunteers echoed through Germany, Hitler eagerly joined the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment. For the first time, he belonged to something larger than himself. In the trenches of Flanders and the Somme, amid mud, rats, and death, Hitler found clarity and obsession. War became his school. He rose no higher than corporal, but earned medals for bravery. Yet more than heroism, he learned something darker: how to obey without question, and how men could be shaped by belief, fear, and discipline. When Germany finally surrendered in 1918, Hitler was devastated. In a hospital recovering from a gas attack, he heard the news of defeat and, as he later claimed, went temporarily blind. To him, it wasn't just the loss of a war, it was the betrayal of a nation. This moment, the collapse of his world, became the spark that would ignite his transformation. Before the war, he was a failed artist. After it, he would become a man consumed by revenge and destiny. Chapter 2. From Soldier to Propagandist. The war had ended, But for Adolf Hitler, peace was unbearable. Germany lay in ruins, its empire dissolved, its army humiliated, its people starving. The proud nation he had fought for was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, accepting full blame for the war and crushing economic reparations. To millions of veterans, this was more than defeat, it was betrayal. And among those seething in silence was a corporal from Bavaria, lost and furious, with nowhere to go. In the one member later said, "It was as if the words themselves had power." From that night on, Hitler was no longer a bystander. He was invited to join the party, and did so as member number 555. The party inflated its membership to seem larger. In truth, he was closer to number 55. He quickly rose through the ranks, transforming dull meetings into fiery spectacles. He spoke not from notes, but from emotion, pacing, shouting, gesturing, eyes ablaze. His speeches were raw anger turned into theater. He learned to manipulate crowds, to make them laugh, to make them cry, to make them hate. He studied oratory like an art form, refining his pauses, his gestures, his tone. When he spoke, people saw not a failed artist, but a man who seemed to embody their suffering. And in that mirror of misery, he offered them a single, dangerous idea. Germany could rise again. By 1920, he helped rename the group the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP. Its emblem, the swastika, was chosen as a symbol of rebirth and unity. Propaganda posters appeared across Munich, and Hitler's rallies drew hundreds, then thousands. He mastered imagery, banners, uniforms, torches, and anthems. Every speech became a performance, every listener a believer. But his rise was not just charisma, it was timing. Germany's democracy was fragile, its economy collapsing. Breadlines stretched for blocks. People carried wheelbarrows of cash to buy food. The nation was desperate, and desperation always seeks a savior. Hitler gave them one. By 1923, intoxicated with power and ambition, he believed the time had come to seize control. Inspired by Mussolini's march on Rome, Hitler and his followers attempted their own coup, the Beer Hall Putsch in Munich. Armed men stormed a beer hall where Bavarian leaders were meeting. Shots were fired, chaos erupted, and Hitler declared a national revolution. But within hours, police crushed the uprising. 16 Nazis were killed, and Hitler was arrested. The failed coup should have ended him. Instead, it transformed him. In court, Hitler used his trial as a stage. He spoke not as a criminal, but as a patriot, claiming he acted out of love for Germany. Newspapers printed his speeches spotlight. The newspapers had turned him into a name millions now recognized, the fiery ex-soldier who had dared to defy the establishment. But this time, he would not seize power by force. He would win it, legally, slowly, patiently. Germany was on its knees. Inflation had turned savings into paper scraps. Factories stood silent. Men returned from war to find no jobs, no homes, no hope. The once proud middle class, the foundation of German stability, was evaporating. And Hitler saw opportunity where others saw despair. The return to politics. In 1925, he rebuilt the Nazi Party with a single, ruthless focus: control. He reorganized its structure like a military machine. Leaders in every region, propaganda in every district, loyalty above all. The brown-uniformed SA, Sturmabteilung, became his muscle, storming rallies, intimidating rivals, and turning politics into theater. Every speech became a ritual. Thousands packed beer halls and auditoriums, staring up at the man on stage. His delivery was hypnotic, starting slow, almost conversational, before rising into a roar that electrified the crowd. He gave them someone to blame: the politicians, the communists, the foreign powers, and the groups he labeled enemies within. And then he gave them something far more powerful: hope. The Great Depression. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, it shattered what little stability remained. Banks collapsed. Unemployment soared. By 1932, more than 6 million Germans were jobless. Once again, despair became a national language, and Hitler spoke it fluently. While other politicians argued in parliament, Hitler traveled relentlessly, 20 cities in a week, sometimes 3 speeches in a day. His plane, dubbed the Flying Führer, allowed him to campaign across the country, a modern miracle that made him seem almost superhuman. His message was simple and emotional: Germany will rise again. And for millions of desperate people, that was enough. By 1932, the Nazi Party had become the largest political movement in Germany, winning 37% of the vote. But Hitler still lacked one thing: absolute power. Becoming chancellor. The old guard, the industrialists, the generals, the aristocrats believed they could control him. They saw in Hitler a useful tool, a demagogue who could rally the masses but be reined in once in office. So on January 30th, 1933, under immense political pressure, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler Chancellor of Germany. The nation cheered. The press celebrated a new beginning. Few realized they had just opened the gates to dictatorship. Fire and fear. Barely a month later, on February 27th, 1933, the Reichstag, Germany's parliament, went up in flames. Hitler's government blamed communists and declared a national emergency. The Reichstag fire decree suspended civil liberties, allowing arrests without trial and censorship of the press. Within weeks, opposition newspapers vanished. Political opponents were imprisoned or silenced. The Nazis now controlled the streets, the police, and the message. In March 1933, the Enabling Act was passed, granting Hitler's cabinet the power to enact laws without parliament's approval. Democracy, as Germany had known it, ceased to exist. The transition was swift and chilling. Within a year, all other parties were banned. The state merged with the Nazi Party. Public loyalty oaths pledged allegiance not to Germany, but to Hitler himself. A cult of personality took root. His image hung in every school, office, and home. Propaganda films portrayed him as the father of the nation, wise, humble, divinely chosen. Children were taught to adore him. Adults were taught to fear him. The brown uniforms marched through cities, chanting his name. Dissent disappeared. Even private conversations became dangerous, neighbors informed on each other, and those who opposed him, journalists, professors, the world in his vision. The veneer of legitimacy cloaked a regime that thrived on fear, ideology, and relentless ambition. By 1935, the country was unrecognizable. Autobahns carved across the landscape, massive rallies in Nuremberg, and public works projects gave the impression of prosperity. Yet beneath the surface, the machinery of oppression had already begun. The SS Schutzstaffel expanded under Heinrich Himmler, overseeing intelligence, policing, and surveillance. Political opponents, intellectuals, and those deemed undesirable faced arrest. To achieve his objectives. By 1939, the world teetered on the brink. The invasion of Poland in September triggered the outbreak of World War II, and Europe was plunged into devastation. Hitler's strategies were initially brilliant, lightning-fast invasions using blitzkrieg tactics, crushing armies before they could regroup. France fell in weeks. Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands succumbed with terrifying speed. Yet, as the empire expanded, cracks began to appear. Supply lines stretched, resistance movements rose, and alliances hardened against him. Hitler's vision of domination demanded absolute loyalty, but also demanded increasingly reckless decisions. Crimes of the regime. While his military campaigns advanced, the internal machinery of the regime implemented policies of unimaginable cruelty. Concentration camps, initially intended for political prisoners, became sites of mass extermination and terror. Jews, Romani people, disabled individuals, and countless others were systematically dehumanized and murdered. Hitler's ideology intertwined with state power, leaving millions dead and entire communities erased. Yet the documentary does not linger on graphic imagery. Instead, it chronicles the cold, bureaucratic precision of absolute authority, the calculated, methodical systems that enabled one man's vision of purity to dictate the fate of millions. Turning points and decline. By 1941, Hitler's reach had extended into the Soviet Union and North Africa. The initial victories were staggering, yet hubris began to erode strategy. The harsh Russian winter, stretched supply lines, and the resilience of Soviet forces halted his advance. Simultaneously, the United States entered the war in 1941, tipping the balance. Allied bombings of German cities, coupled with internal dissent, created cracks in Hitler's empire. No longer invincible, he became increasingly isolated, relying on a circle of loyalists to shield him from reality. By 1944, the situation was dire. The Allies had landed in Normandy. Soviet troops were advancing from the east, and the once feared dictator now spent hours in his bunker beneath Berlin, disconnected from the reality above. Paranoia consumed him. Generals who once executed orders flawlessly now faced suspicion. Decisions became erratic. The bunker, in the end. April 1945. Berlin was encerclet. Soviet artillery thundered above the city, and the streets were littered with rubble and corpses. Hitler, now a shadow of the man who once electrified crowds, retreated into the Führer bunker. His empire of fear, conquest, and propaganda had collapsed under its own weight. In his final days, he married Eva Braun, a small personal act amidst monumental collapse. Surrounded by aides and loyalists, Hitler contemplated a world that had turned against him. The man who had risen from rejection and despair to command millions faced the ultimate consequence: isolation and defeat. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler died in the bunker. Germany, a nation he had reshaped with fear and ideology, now lay in ruins. His vision of a 1,000-year Reich had lasted merely 12 years, leaving behind destruction, trauma, and a grim lesson for history. Chapter 5. Reflection and Legacy. As the smoke cleared over Europe in 1945, the world confronted the scale of destruction left in Adolf Hitler's wake. Cities lay in rubble, governments had collapsed, and millions of lives were extinguished. Yet beyond the physical devastation, history faced a more profound question. How could a failed artist, once wandering Vienna's streets, transform into a dictator whose ideology terrorized a continent? Hitler's rise was not an accident of fate, nor solely a product of personal ambition. It was the collision of an individual's relentless drive with a society steeped in desperation, humiliation, and fear. Germany's economic collapse, political instability, and social unrest created fertile ground for a man who could speak to both their pride and their grievances. Scholars have long analyzed the machinery that enabled Hitler's ascent. His mastery of rhetoric, ability to manipulate imagery and emotion, and skill in creating a cult of personality were tools that allowed him to bend a nation's will. Yet these tools alone were not enough. Without a populace desperate for salvation, his words would have remained just that, words. The human cost of his ambition was staggering. Millions perished in wars of conquest and systematic campaigns of extermination. Families were torn apart, cities obliterated, and entire cultures threatened with erasure. Yet, even as history cataloged these horrors, it also revealed the vulnerabilities of societies that allow fear and propaganda to override reason. The lessons extend beyond Germany and beyond Hitler himself. History teaches that ordinary people, faced with uncertainty and despair, may hand power to those who promise certainty, order, and greatness. often at the cost of freedom. The warning is clear. Vigilance, critical thinking, and the protection of democratic institutions are essential shields against the seduction of authoritarian figures. In contemporary reflection, Hitler's story has been studied not to glorify him, but to understand the anatomy of tyranny. Museums, archives, and educational institutions worldwide preserve the memory of this dark chapter to ensure that future generations recognize the signs before it's too late. As we look back, it is tempting to search for answers in Hitler's mind, his upbringing, or his failures. Yet the broader lesson lies in the intersection of individual psychology and societal conditions. A man alone may inspire curiosity, fear, or horror, but a society complicit, whether through inaction, fear, or blind loyalty, can transform potential into catastrophe. And so, the story concludes where it began, with a human being flawed and ambitious, navigating a world that shaped him as much as he shaped it. From the streets of Vienna to the ruins of Berlin, Adolf Hitler's life remains a cautionary tale, a study in obsession, and a reminder of the dangers when power is concentrated, unchecked, and unchallenged. History doesn't only warn us about monsters, it shows us how they are made. Thank you for joining Humans History. If you found this journey into the life of one of history's most feared figures insightful, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. There are countless more stories waiting, stories of power, ambition, genius, and tragedy, all shaped by the hands of humans, just like you and me. Until the next story, remember, the past is never truly gone. It lives in the choices we make today.